One Question is designed to give subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to One Question, where we highlight executive leaders in college athletics. Our guest today is Joshua Gordon. Josh is the founder and senior practitioner of the Sports Conflict Institute. He's also a senior instructor of sports business at the University of Oregon Lundquist College of Business. He also spent time as a professor at the Oregon School of Law. Greetings, Josh. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks. Pleasure to be with you.
Now, Josh, I wanted to have you on because I know you do some consulting in crisis management. You do some organizational culture assessment, conflict management, competencies. And essentially, you teach people how to be complex problem solvers within their organization. You do a lot with athletics, whether it be coach to player, coach and administration, and just on campus in general. Based on your experience consulting on the conflict resolution aspect, what are some of the commonalities you've seen across organizations in terms of disputes and conflicts? And how can those things that you've seen negatively influence an organization's effectiveness?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I'd say that despite sometimes the way administrators and coaches and athletes are portrayed in the media, that most are trying to do the right thing. So they're starting from the idea that they're trying to do the right thing, they're under enormous pressure to perform, and they have really clear indicators of what winning and losing look like. And so they operate in that environment where performance matters, and I find that a really very interesting environment to spend time in, where you have a compressed time frame and a lot of pressure and a lot of folks doing these things to try and get advantage in any way they can. So one of the things I think that we see as a theme in the work that I do is that too often people are stuck in reactionary mode versus proactive. A lot of times the problems, you could look very early and see the indicators of when something was awry in the culture, or you had an individual who was off doing their own thing and people turn the other eye or turn the other cheek. And the proactive side of it is a much more reasonable way to go after it than the reactionary, where it becomes very, very expensive, whether it's hard dollars or opportunity costs or loss of brand or reputation at that point too. And a big part of what I see, there's a few themes that have emerged in the work that I've done over the years. One is that there tends to be a lack of alignment as one of the core contributors to some of these problems that arise. And problems could be as drastic as a significant hazing incident or a violation of NCAA rules, or it could be some misconduct by a coach or an administrator or an athlete. Any of these things kind of rooted in this lack of alignment around what are the basic values and the core behavioral expectations at the core of what anyone's doing. And a lot of times related to that, people talk about culture. They talk about having a winning culture, a positive culture, but they talk about it in platitudes. And those platitudes don't always tie in closely to a system that translates to behavior that really understands what the human factor is and how do you deal with things when they go off alignment, how do you get them back into alignment.
Can you expand further on that term, platitudes, and how it applies?
Sure. So a lot of coaches will, coaches, administrators, anyone will give great lip service to what it means to be a winning culture. We want to have a winning culture. We want to empower everyone. We want everyone to show up every day, do the work. We want people to be humble. We want people to have a culture of servitude, right? There's lots of core values that come out of that. And everyone's on board and everyone feels good about it, and it's very motivational, and you might have 16 different interpretations of what that all meant.
So you're saying that these core values or guiding principles can be interpreted in a number of different ways, so much so that the way people will base their level of being proactive or how they react to varying situations might actually be far off from what the core value actually calls for because it wasn't properly defined.
Yeah, let's take a word like respect. We're going to have a culture where we respect each other. No one's going to disagree with that. Sounds great. Yeah, let's respect each other. But Ty, you and I might have very different sense of what it means to operate and behave with respect. And so if our cultural conversation ends at the point of we all agree that we're going to respect each other, which sounds great, and no one's going to say, you know what, coach, or you know what, my AD, I don't want to be in an environment that respects each other. No one's going to argue against that, right? But what respect means to each of us is very different. And so we need to get the conversation down to the behavior level. Does respect mean we don't play music loudly? Does respect mean we show up on time? Does respect mean we dress a certain way? Does respect mean we have a certain way we refer to each other? Does respect mean, we tell someone when someone's struggling with mental health issues? What does it mean, right?
So some of what you've seen in your consulting comes down to the granular level of we need to define exactly what we mean in terms of communication or in terms of our culture or in terms of our core values. And the lack of that explanation can lead to the bigger problems we see on campuses around the country today.
Yeah, often the machine gets brought down not by, this enormous moment where someone knocks the machine off its kilter, but by lots of little grains of sand in the system. And these little moments and these little misunderstandings and these little interpretation of what our values are run into problem all the time. And if you think about it, when we talk about the X's and O's of our sports, we're really, really good about being extremely detail-oriented. When we're talking about the physical training, we're looking at nutrition or strength training, we tend to be really, really good about looking at those details. When we're talking about the human side and the culture and conflict management, we tend to speak in the really high level. So it would be the equivalent of saying, we want to be really strong. Now go to the weight room.
Right, I see what you're saying. That isn't very specific.
Correct. And it's for good reason that people struggle with it. It's often not the area of expertise that someone came to their position of leadership. If you're a head basketball coach, you may be there because you are tremendous with X's and O's, you're a great recruiter, and you are a great motivator. Those are all incredible attributes, but that doesn't mean that you know how to operationalize the culture that you want to build.
Right. So let's say on the individual level and the organizational level, if I come up through the ranks as a graduate assistant athletics director, associate athletics director, and I end up on the senior level management in an athletics department, or even if I'm progressing through the coaching ranks as a graduate assistant to assistant coach to coordinator, it sounds like you're saying that throughout my growth, I should probably define some of these values, specifically the ones that can be lost in the gray area when it comes to communication, and have these values defined as I progress through the ranks.
Yeah, and put them into operational terms. You look at some of the most successful coaches, their cultural blueprint has followed them throughout their careers. And what that looks like behaviorally will adapt with the particular dynamic of the individuals they're working with on a season-to-season basis. And it'll be contextualized in the value system of a particular institution, which is going to vary for them. But the core values are there, and then they know how to translate those values into behavior. And it's a real skill set that is learnable and can make the difference between taking that talent that you have before you, whether it's talented administrators, talented coaches, talented athletes, but actually making it come into a high-performance culture.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind, can you give us some specific tools that individuals or organizations can put in place to create an environment for a successful culture?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, what I think an important part of this is you're not trying to look towards another successful culture and just mirror and copy that. That doesn't work. What you can look to is how do successful cultures get built. And so what I think is a really important tool set for any leader to have in their toolbox is the ability to ask the right questions, first of all. What do we want to be? You want to be very deliberate and explicit about the culture you want and to establish it. The process is fairly repeatable. The specific culture is going to be very unique to your team and your organization. And so one of the first things to do is to get out of the mindset that you can simply articulate a high-level value and then that organically culture will happen. Culture is a deliberate activity, just like strength training, just like nutrition, just like game planning and video review and anything else that happens, financial management. It takes the same type of discipline and structure and deliberate nature to it. And the other thing is that it very much is a bidirectional step. So while an athletic director or an administrator or a coach might have a really clear set of what they want that culture to be, ultimately to turn into behavior, you have to work bidirectionally with the folks that you're leading to make sure that you understand who they are, that you're understanding some of the human factor of what they bring, and that you can align who they are to the culture and make sure that their interests are being met as well.
Okay, let's say if respect is something I value and I've worked my way up in my career, my definition of respect when I actually get into the position of authority has been with me along the way. And I don't imagine it changes, but you're saying I have to adjust it based on those that I lead. Help me out with that.
Yeah, so staying with the respect example, if you're trying to build a culture of respect, one, it's helpful to know what that means to you if you're the leader and be able to articulate clearly in ways that matter. But then you're never going to get all the way there with that step alone. You want to ask the folks who are part of your shared culture, what does respect mean to them? And be a bit nimble when you see you might get very different answers. You might even get some answers that seem a bit oppositional. You know, one person, respect means that I call you by your first name, another person says, no, you always call me Mr. or Coach. And so we have to work out some of those differences, but way better to work out those differences up front before we're in a point of conflict than to figure it'll just sort itself out. You know, preseason, training camps, practices, great time to be working on these things in a timeout, in the moment, in a boardroom when the media are waiting outside and you're in your war room of an incident that's happened as an administrator. Those are really tough times to suddenly work on these things.
Are there major differences in terms of coaches to their assistants or coaches to student athletes, athletic directors and their staff, or presidents and how they run their organization? Have you seen any major differences in your experience?
You know, the human nature tends to prevail all the way through in those different contexts. All of them share a really critical dynamic, which is they tend to have power imbalance. And with that power imbalance, it would be very easy to simply go about exerting your power and asserting your authority to impose what you want folks to do. Problem is, people find other sources of power, ones you don't want, right? They talk to the media, they don't behave in the ways you want, they aren't motivated, so they're not performing at the level you want. So in the big scheme of things, you know, we have three major ways that we can deal with issues: interests, rights, and power. By and large, people too often default to power, sometimes rights. So the temptation is to use power and rights and your authority, but flipping that equation and spending 95% of your time in interests, understanding needs and desires and concerns is going to go a much further way to getting that shared culture enacted. And if you look at all the top cultures across the collegiate platform, you're going to see folks who are spending their time at the interest-based level being proactive. And that's where it's going to really lead to a performance culture, not the rights and power that flew a little bit 30, 40 years ago, but not anymore.
Right. Interest ties to your principles, which can tie to the core values, which you have to define, including everybody into that definition. This has been an excellent conversation, Joshua. Now, I know you do this in terms of consulting. You have your own, the Sports Conflict Institute, and you've put a lot of this information in a number of articles and research, and I think you have some books. Can you tell us about your most recent book and how people can get it?
Yeah, so the Sports Playbook, Building Teams That Outperform You After Year, really is about how do you explicitly build these high-performance cultures. And it's written with administrators, coaches, and athletes in mind, but it's also written for anyone who cares about performance. And so the examples are all really critical, important sports examples, but you might be an executive at Google and you could read this and take the concepts and apply them. There's a number of really specific tools throughout the playbook that don't tell you what your culture should be, but tell you how to build the culture you want. And there's some really critical tools, whether it's individual plans or charters or assessment instruments like DISC or conflict styles, all in the book. And it's It's a good read. It's on Amazon, and I hope people make this a critical part of their bookshelf.
Well, hopefully they will. Joshua, this has been an excellent conversation. And of course, you and I know that culture is a very important aspect when running a successful organization. And I appreciate you joining us here on One Question.
Thank you for having me.
That was Joshua Gordon. He's a founder and senior practitioner of the Sports Conflict Institute, and he's also a senior instructor of sports business at University of Oregon's Lundquist College of Business. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of One Question is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.